Chronicon Mundi.
Dive deep into history.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are strapping in for a journey that, well, it fundamentally reshaped how the Western world viewed the Pacific Ocean and its peoples.
It really did. We're taking a deep plunge into the historical record of James Cook's first voyage.
That epic 3-year trip of the HMS Endeavour spanning 1768 to 1771.
And it's a story of, incredible scientific ambition, iron-willed naval discipline.
And a human cost that really haunts the historical legacy of discovery. It's quite a story.
It is. The sources we're looking at are extraordinary. The level of granularity, it includes everything from the exact measurements of their temporary fort in Tahiti to, the specific causes of death for key crew members.
So our mission today is to extract not just the chronological history, but those essential, sometimes really surprising nuggets of knowledge that reveal what 18th century deep-sea exploration was actually like.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this right away by establishing the dual nature of the mission. Because there were two, weren't there?
Oh, absolutely. The official, publicly stated goal, the one that got the Royal Society's backing, was purely scientific.
Observing the transit of Venus across the face of the sun, that was scheduled for June 3, 1769.
And this wasn't just, idle astronomy. This was the absolute cutting edge of geodesy. It was crucial for establishing the precise distance between the Earth and the sun.
The fundamental unit of the solar system.
The astronomical unit, yes. And that scientific imperative, it really dictated the choice of vessel, which is fascinating in itself.
Right, because the ship wasn't a sleek, fast naval frigate.
No, not at all. The Endeavour was a Whitby-built collier, so essentially a broad-bottomed, sturdy cargo ship. They were often called cat-built.
And the Admiralty bought it specifically for this mission?
They did. They refitted it because this design prioritized stability and capacity over speed. That made it uniquely resilient to shallow water and potential groundings, a feature that would come in very handy later on.
That practicality is something that often gets overlooked, I think. It was built to handle heavy seas and carry huge amounts of supplies for a mission that was going to last years.
And while it wasn't designed for war, it still needed to be ready.
For defense, yeah.
The Endeavour was outfitted with 10 4-pounder carriage guns. 6 of those were mounted on the upper deck, ready to go, and it had a dozen swivel guns.
More than enough firepower for signaling and, showing force, if not getting into a full-scale naval battle.
And the crew's composition really reflects this duality of the mission. You had the naval command on one hand and the civilian scientific staff on the other.
So heading the naval side was James Cook, a lieutenant at the time?
Right. Assisted by experienced officers like Lieutenant Zachary Hicks and John Gore, and Master Robert Molyneux, who was responsible for navigation.
But then you have these crucial civilian additions, what the Navy called supernumeraries.
And that's where the money and the scientific prestige really came in. The central figure here was the young, very wealthy, and highly influential naturalist, Sir Joseph Banks.
He paid for his own extensive retinue. He later became president of the Royal Society, which is no small thing.
No, and Banks brought along highly skilled specialists. People like Daniel Solander, a Swedish botanist, and a direct student of the legendary Carl Linnaeus. This wasn't just a trip. It was a full-scale floating laboratory.
And of course, the key man for the official mission.
The astronomer Charles Green. He was appointed by the Royal Society specifically to carry out the Venus observations.
Now, it's important to remember that Cook wasn't just some junior officer who got handed a big job. His pre-voyage reputation was foundational to this whole thing.
Very much so. Lord Colville, Cook's former captain, made sure Cook got full credit for his extensive surveying work in Newfoundland.
That personal endorsement was critical.
It was. Colville went directly to the Lords of the Admiralty and told them Cook was, and I'm quoting here, well qualified for greater undertakings of the same kind.
That kind of high-level, credible backing gave the mission the momentum it needed to go forward under Cook's command.
And that endorsement was vital because, as you mentioned, the Admiralty wasn't sending Cook halfway around the world just for an astronomical photo op.
No. Tucked away inside the official instructions, which were only to be opened after the Venus observation,
were the secret orders, the real geopolitical stakes.
The search for Terra Australis Incognita.
The ultimate geographical prize. Cook was explicitly instructed that after leaving Tahiti, he was to sail south to 40 degrees south latitude and actively search for that rumored massive southern landmass, a continent that had captured the European imagination for centuries.
Okay, so following that initial preparation, let's follow the Endeavour's path now, starting with the early journey and the necessity of that strict naval discipline.
Right, because even though the mission was scientific, the vessel was HMS Endeavour, a Royal Navy ship. Discipline was completely non-negotiable.
And the severity of the punishments, it really reflects the need to maintain control over a diverse crew trapped together for years at a time.
Absolutely. Infractions like desertion, negligence, refusal to follow orders, they were all punishable by the lash. It was standard, public, and brutal.
And we get a very clear look at this discipline in action early on, during their stop in Rio de Janeiro in December of 1768.
This stop was essential for fresh water and supplies, but even the logistics of it revealed the local customs and the costs they had to deal with.
They ran into friction with the local port authorities almost immediately.
They did. The fees alone are so specific and telling. It was £7, 4 shillings sterling, just for the pilot.
Which is a lot of money back then.
A huge amount. And on top of that, they were forced to pay an additional 10 shillings per day for an attendant boat for the pilot. A boat cook noted in his journal they didn't want or need, but it was required by local custom. It just shows you the small, constant costs of navigating colonial bureaucracy.
But more telling than the cost of the pilot was the cost of insubordination.
Right. Immediately upon preparing to leave Rio, Cook ordered punishment. Robert Anderson, a seaman, and William Judge, a Marine, each received 12 lashes.
One for attempted desertion, the other for abusive language toward an officer.
And here's an important detail. The system demanded immediate compliance. When the boatswain's mate, a man named John Reedon, failed to properly administer those first 2 punishments.
Maybe out of sympathy, or he was just reluctant.
Who knows? But he himself was immediately given 12 lashes for neglecting his duty. It sent a clear message. Failure to enforce discipline was itself a punishable offense. There was no ambiguity about Cook's authority.
The journey then took them into the extreme south, leading to that difficult and tragic stop in Tierra del Fuego in January 1769.
This was their first real confrontation with a devastatingly hostile environment.
It really was. The landing party, which included Banks and Solander, they spent a grueling time ashore collecting samples, but they were caught completely off guard by the sudden, intense cold.
This is where human error meets environmental brutality.
And that famous, unfortunate anecdote here involves Banks's 2 black servants.
Right. These men were responsible for carrying a quantity of liquor, which is meant for the entire party to combat the cold. But tragically, they, as the journal says, made too free with it.
They drank too much of it themselves.
Far too much. And the sources are quite explicit about the consequences. When the temperature just plunged, the rest of the party managed to find or create a shelter and start a fire. But Banks's servants were so stupefied by the alcohol that they couldn't move.
And they were found the next morning.
Found dead, only a quarter-mile from shelter, completely exposed to the elements. It was a swift, brutal, and utterly preventable loss early in the voyage. A harsh lesson about self-control in the face of extreme danger.
And beyond that internal tragedy, their encounter with the local people, who we now identify as the Osh people, it just provides a wonderful window into cultural differences.
It does. The English, struggling with the language, initially and mistakenly called them Picheria, simply because it was a word the natives often used during their interactions.
They were just repeating it back.
Exactly. But the anthropological observations are so detailed. Banks described the native housing as minimal but suited to their nomadic life. Simple dwellings with beds just made of grass laid around the perimeter.
And their method for water storage was innovative.
Very. They used the bladder of an animal. They drink from a small hole near the top and elevate the bottom so the water would sort of spring into their mouths.
What really stands out to me here, and it offers such a crucial insight, is how the Anash people had a complete lack of interest in high-value European tools. Knives, hatchets.
Things that usually fascinated and tempted native populations elsewhere.
Right, but they were just ignored.
It's a profound moment of cultural disconnect. Their only interest for trade was for beads or anything red in color for ornamentation.
So their concept of value was dictated purely by cultural and aesthetic needs, not practical utility as defined by the Europeans.
Precisely. They already had everything they needed for their survival. It led Cook and Banks to reflect later on the possibility that these people were, and this is a quote, far more happier than we Europeans in their simplicity.
From the freezing desperation of Tierra del Fuego, the Endeavour sailed on, reaching its ultimate target destination, the tropical tranquility of Tahiti.
They landed at Matavai Bay on April 13, 1769, and the immediate priority was preparation for the transit of Venus.
And Cook treated this landing like a military operation. The local population had a reputation for, let's say, opportunistic theft.
So security was absolutely paramount. He immediately set up a heavily fortified structure, Fort Venus. It was defended by 2 4-pounder carriage guns, 6 swivel guns, and garrisoned by 45 armed men.
And we have astonishing detail on the fort's construction, which just shows the level of commitment to security.
The north and south sides had this meticulous defensive layout. A high bank of earth, 4.5 feet high on the inside, backed by a significant ditch that was 10 feet wide and 6 feet deep.
And the weakest side, the one facing the river.
That was protected by palisades and a double row of empty casks, all to ensure maximum defense for those 2 4-pounders. This wasn't just designed to repel an attack. It was designed to prevent any opportunistic intrusions.
All of this labor culminated in the primary scientific goal, the transit of Venus on June 3rd, 1769.
The observation was successfully achieved. The astronomer, Charles Green, he secured the data necessary for triangulation, with other simultaneous observations happening around the globe.
All aiming to determine the astronomical unit, the distance between the Earth and the Sun.
Yes.
Wait, I know the observation was a success, but what were the specific challenges? I mean, this wasn't just pointing a telescope at the Sun, right?
No, not at all. You're right. The observation itself was scientifically fraught due to what's known as the black drop effect.
The black drop effect.
Yeah. As Venus transits the Sun, atmospheric distortions make it incredibly difficult to determine the exact moment the planet visually separates from the limb of the Sun. It creates this optical illusion like a black tear or a drop seems to drag between the planet and the Sun's edge.
So it's hard to time it precisely.
Incredibly hard. Green, Cook, and Banks all observed the event, but they each recorded slightly different ingress and egress times, which complicated the eventual calculation. But the fact that they achieved the observation at all, despite these technical difficulties, was still a monumental success for the Royal Society.
A monumental success, yes, but the legacy of the Venus mission in Tahiti is, well, it's irrevocably stained by disease, specifically the introduction and rapid spread of venereal disease.
The sources here indicate a nuanced, if tragic, situation regarding VD. Cook initially feared his crew was responsible.
That would make sense.
It would. However, the locals provided convincing evidence, specific dates and locations, that the disease had already been introduced about 10 to 15 months earlier.
By who?
By 2 Spanish ships commanded by a man they called Tutura. So whether the Endeavour introduced a new strain or just accelerated the existing spread is, in a way, secondary. The immediate result was devastating.
And the disease quickly spread among the crew, largely due to the availability of women and the trade that was established. Men were exchanging items like nails and shirts for sexual access.
Despite Cook's efforts to stop it. And this brings us to a major internal operational headache for him: theft.
Because nails were essentially currency.
Exactly. They were vital for trade and desperately desired by the Tahitians for building and utility. So Cook's own men began systematically stealing them from the ship's stores.
It became a huge scandal. We know that more than 120 pounds of nails were pilfered by Cook's men.
And Cook responded with the utmost severity. When a man named Archibald Wolfe was caught with a large quantity, he received 24 lashes. A severe punishment.
And the interesting detail is why it was so severe.
Right. He received the punishment specifically because he refused to name his accomplices, which shows you the scale of the organized conspiracy among the lower ranks. This wasn't just 1 or 2 guys.
And the locals were equally ingenious thieves. The anecdote about the iron rake for the oven is a classic example.
It is. The rake was propped against the outside wall of the fort. A native man, lurking nearby, just waited until the sentry had his back turned.
And then what?
Then he used a long, crooked stick with a hook on the end to stealthily haul the heavy iron implement right over the wall.
Cook's reaction to this specific local theft is perhaps the most defining moment of his leadership in Tahiti.
I agree. He seized 22 valuable canoes belonging to the natives and threatened to burn them unless the stolen item was returned. So he used economic leverage and threat.
But, and this is crucial, he simultaneously refused to permit the firing of muskets, even with just powder for intimidation.
This refusal was incredibly strategic and insightful. Cook actually articulated his reasoning. He feared that if the natives saw the muskets firing without effect, just powder, no shot, they might despise firearms and lose their respect for the English weapons.
And losing that respect, he argued, might lead them to attack, and the potential outcome could be devastating for both sides. He chose measured, non-lethal diplomacy over escalating violence.
A really smart move.
And beyond all the conflicts in commerce, the journey also fostered some genuine human connections. The liaisons weren't always purely transactional.
No, affection clearly played a role. We know this because when two Marines attempted to desert, they didn't just run off. They took refuge in the hills with their temporary wives.
Which demonstrates emotional attachments that superseded naval discipline, though they were eventually caught and returned.
But the most crucial human connection for the success of the rest of the voyage was Tupaia.
Right. He was a Raiatean-chief, destined to be a high-ranking priest.
And Banks, recognizing his immense cultural and navigational value, encouraged his presence on the Endeavour for the next leg of the journey.
Tupaia was not just an interpreter. He was a revolutionary figure for the European understanding of the Pacific. He was a true master navigator.
He possessed an internal, comprehensive map of the Pacific. His knowledge base was staggering.
He navigated not by instruments, but by a complex, sophisticated traditional system.
A system that included deep knowledge of stars and celestial movements, the patterns of ocean swells, the direction of currents, the behavior of birds as indicators of nearby land.
And even the subtle reflections of distant lagoons upon the clouds.
His mental mapping was so extensive that he could list islands hundreds of miles away in accurate relation to each other. It was incredible.
And his presence was immediately useful as an interpreter. He confirmed to Cook that the Polynesian peoples across vast areas, from Tahiti all the way to New Zealand, shared a common language and cultural heritage.
Tupaia's participation fundamentally challenged the Western view that only Europeans were capable of sophisticated deep-sea navigation. He proved them wrong.
So with the Venus observation done and Tupaia aboard, Cook officially broke the seal on those secret Admiralty orders on July 13, 1769.
And the mission shifted from science to geopolitics, the search for Terra Australis Incognita.
Following instructions precisely, Cook set a course directly south from Matavai Bay, right to the 40° south latitude line.
This was the required search parameter for the rumored continent. After sailing a long stretch and finding nothing but empty ocean, the Endeavour turned westward.
Which led them toward one of the biggest geographical prizes of the entire voyage.
New Zealand. They sighted land on October 7, 1769, and Cook spent the next several months executing what was perhaps his greatest achievement in cartography during this voyage.
Circumnavigating and charting nearly the entire coastline.
It was a massive undertaking that just fundamentally changed the global map. Cook's charting proved two things definitively.
First, that New Zealand consisted of two large main islands, separated by the strait that would later bear his name, Cook Strait.
And second, and this was crucial, it proved that this landmass was not the colossal southern continent that European speculation had insisted upon.
And he was only the second European to land there, after Abel Tasman way back in 1642.
Right. During this circumnavigation, he first encountered the Maori people, whom he came to admire greatly among all the Polynesians. His preferred spot was at the north tip of the South Island Queen Charlotte Sound, specifically Ship Cove, a sheltered harbor he would return to frequently on later voyages.
But that first encounter with the Maori was fraught with danger.
It was. A skirmish occurred immediately upon landing. Cook demonstrated his now established policy of measured force. He wanted to disperse the armed men and prevent fatalities.
So what did he do?
He fired a musket loaded with small shot or bird shot at the leading man to sting him, and instructed others to fire muskets loaded with ball over their heads.
A clear demonstration of power intended to intimidate and compel submission without necessarily causing death unless it was absolutely necessary.
And he managed to move from that initial conflict to eventual trade and peaceful surveying through a combination of discipline and restraint.
Once that monumental task of charting New Zealand was complete, the Endeavour set course north towards the eastern coast of the continent they would eventually call New South Wales.
They passed the magnificent natural harbor of Port Jackson, the future site of Sydney.
And here, the scientific contingent, Banks and Solander, they were busy, but also frustrated.
Very. They went ashore frequently, gathering thousands of plant specimens, hence the name Botany Bay, and tried repeatedly to establish meaningful communication with the Aborigines, but without any success.
The Aborigines consistently kept their distance, just viewing the Europeans with suspicion.
And this is the background for the moment of formal claim in late August 1770. Cook formally claimed and took possession of the entire eastern coast, from their landing latitude all the way down to the ship's current location.
And he named it New South Wales.
To make the claim official and permanent in the historical record, he ordered 3 volleys of small arms to be fired by the shore party, a symbolic gesture which the Endeavour answered in return with its own guns.
But this act of claiming land is immediately followed by one of Cook's most surprising and, I think, insightful philosophical reflections. It reveals his true views on the people he had just dispossessed.
It does. He described the Aborigines he encountered as a timorous and inoffensive race.
And he speculated that they were far more happier than we Europeans.
Precisely because their lives were not complicated by what he called superfluous needs. They were, in his view, happy in their ignorance of the very conveniences Europeans felt were necessary for a civilized life.
He pointed out the practicality of this assessment. He noted that they set absolutely no value on European goods,
often leaving clothing that had been gifted to them carelessly upon the sea beach. For Cook, this demonstrated their sufficiency and their lack of attachment to material possession, a stark contrast to the acquisitiveness and theft he'd seen in his own crew and among the Tahitians. It's a remarkable piece of observation that goes way beyond mere geographical charting.
The scientific and geographical accomplishments were now secured. The transit of Venus, charting New Zealand, mapping the east coast of Australia, but the voyage was far from over.
No, and the very structure of the Endeavour was about to be tested in a near-fatal disaster at the Great Barrier Reef in May 1770.
This was the moment where the Admiralty's decision to choose that broad-bottomed, resilient collier over a sleek naval vessel paid off completely.
It really did. Cook had already noted danger signs, increasingly shoal or shallow water and numerous small islands, as the Endeavour approached the Tropic of Capricorn.
He had inadvertently sailed into the labyrinthine passage between the mainland and the Great Barrier Reef, one of the most treacherous, uncharted waters in the world.
And in June 1770, the inevitable happened. The ship struck the coral reef.
The crisis was immediate and absolute. The ship was taking on massive amounts of water.
Had they been on a frigate, they likely would have sunk rapidly, saving the Endeavour, its crew, and all the invaluable scientific data and journals accumulated over the past 2 years. It demanded what would later be called Cook's greatest feat of seamanship.
And this required the immediate execution of a critical ancient naval technique, fathering the ship. I think we really need to detail this process because it was primitive, but its effectiveness relied on a deep, practical understanding of hydrostatics.
Absolutely. Fathering is essentially creating a massive, temporary external patch using whatever is available. They took a large sail, a lower studding sail, and painstakingly filled it with materials designed to create a watertight seal.
So things like oakum.
Right, which is tarred rope fibers used for caulking. They used large amounts of wool and even animal waste and dung, anything that could plug a hole.
And the trick was in the physics of it.
Exactly. They carefully dragged this loaded sail underneath the hull of the ship using ropes. The powerful inward pressure of the water rushing into the large gash in the hull would then suck and hold the material-packed sail against the hole, like a giant temporary bandage.
A desperate race against time. The pressure held the sail in place, temporarily slowing the leak just enough for the pumps to gain control.
And the crew redoubled their vigor when they saw the pumps were winning. This small gain allowed them to eventually heave the ship off the coral reef and push it into deep water.
They then sailed to the nearest safe harbor for structural repairs, which they named Endeavour River, near what is now Cooktown in Queensland.
They spent weeks repairing the hull there. It was an incredible demonstration of resilience. The editor of Cook's later journals was unambiguous in his assessment.
He said saving the Endeavour from the reef, repairing it, and then successfully navigating a passage through the subsequent, seemingly endless coral shoals
must stand as Cook's greatest feat of seamanship. It combined technical ingenuity with commanding leadership under moral threat.
Having escaped the clutches of the Great Barrier Reef, the Endeavour still had a long journey home. They sailed north, seeking a reliable port for more substantial maintenance and resupply.
And they chose Batavia, modern-day Jakarta, which was a major Dutch trading hub at the time.
This stop should have been routine, but it proved to be catastrophic for the crew's health.
Batavia was notorious for its unwholesome, swampy air and rampant tropical disease. So while the ship was structurally repaired, the cost to the crew was astronomical in human life.
The primary culprit was the flux, or dysentery.
And this is not just a stomachache. This is a horrific bacterial or protozoal infection of the colon. It's characterized by bloody diarrhea, fever, crippling abdominal pain.
And it leads rapidly to extreme dehydration, physical wasting, and often death if left untreated in the conditions of the time.
So when the Endeavour set sail from Batavia on December 26, 1770, Cook recorded this heartbreaking shift in his journal. He officially referred to his vessel not as HM Endeavour, but as my hospital ship.
Because so many of the crew were still seriously ill, the disease was already taking hold, and the mortality rate was about to spike dramatically.
The subsequent list of losses is just relentless and tragic, wiping out key personnel whose skills were essential to the voyage's success and documentation.
Immediately after leaving Batavia, John Thurman, the sailmaker's assistant, succumbed, then midshipman Mr. John Booty.
And critically, boatswain Mr. Jano Guthrie, the man responsible for all the ship's rigging and sails, he died.
The scientific contingent was decimated. The artist Sidney Parkinson, whose detailed drawings comprised the entire visual record of the voyage, he perished.
And the man for whom the entire expedition was launched in the first place, the astronomer Charles Green, also died from the flux. Even Surgeon Monkhouse, the man tasked with treating the illness, eventually succumbed himself.
And most profoundly tragic for the voyage's cultural legacy was the loss of the Polynesian interpreter Tupaya.
He died, along with his young servant Tiata. Tupaya had been the living embodiment of the vastness and sophistication of Pacific navigation. His death meant the loss of that invaluable bridge between worlds.
The relentless mortality continued as they crossed the Indian Ocean. The numbers just paint a grim picture.
By the time the ship reached Cape Town, South Africa, on March 14, 1771, 34 men had died since leaving Batavia.
And the sickness was far from contained. Another 30 crew members were still seriously ill upon arrival.
The death toll wasn't finished even then. 5 more men, including key officers like Lieutenant Hicks and Master Robert Molyneux, died either during the final leg of the journey or shortly after reaching shore.
In total, 39 crew members died after that single, ill-fated repair stop in Batavia.
It's a real irony. Cook had mastered the diet necessary to prevent scurvy, a common killer on these voyages, but tropical diseases proved far deadlier than the cold or starvation on this particular voyage.
The Endeavour finally reached England on July 13, 1771, 3 years after setting sail. A scientific triumph, but a human disaster. Cook reported to the Admiralty on the 17th.
And the immediate aftermath saw James Cook rewarded for his incredible achievements, both the publicized and the secret ones. On August 15, 1771, he was promoted to commander.
And he was received personally by King George III at St. James's Palace.
The magnitude of the first voyage's geographical and scientific achievements. It really remains one of the greatest accomplishments of the Enlightenment era.
I mean, despite the tragic human cost on the return journey, the expedition secured crucial astronomical data with the transit of Venus observation.
And geographically, it delivered the first detailed, accurate charting of nearly the entire coastline of New Zealand and the entire eastern coast of Australia. This one voyage redrew the map of the South Pacific.
That brings us to the end of our deep dive into the Endeavour's history-making journey. Thank you for joining us for this comprehensive look at the first voyage of James Cook.
Our next deep dive will unpack the incredible challenge of the second voyage from 1772 to 1775, focusing specifically on Cook's groundbreaking search for the Antarctic continent. We will explore the separation of his ships in the Antarctic fog, the validation of the marine chronometer, and how he finally put the myth of Terra Australis Incognita to rest. Join us next time.